Did you know the US seriously considered strapping tiny bombs to bats and dropping them on Japan? Or that an army of inflatable tanks helped trick Hitler? And what if we told you that pigeons were once considered for guiding missiles with terrifying accuracy? Get ready, because history's arsenal is weirder than you think. Number 12. Greek fire. That was basically ancient napalm, but spookier. The Byzantine Empire had a secret weapon so terrifying, its recipe was guarded more closely than gold. Imagine being on a wooden ship and suddenly a stream of fire that water couldn't extinguish shoots towards you, sticking to everything it touched. Your ship, your clothes, even the water itself seemed to burn. This was Greek fire, and for centuries, it gave the Byzantines a massive edge in naval battles. What made it so utterly unexpected? Well, for starters, nobody today knows exactly what it was made of. Theories abound: petroleum, naphtha, sulfur, quicklime, resin, phosphorus. Truth is, the exact formula was a state secret, passed down through generations of the Byzantine elite, and eventually it was lost to time. This wasn't just any fire. It was a chemical nightmare. It was reportedly launched through siphons or tubes, sometimes even in grenades. The psychological impact was immense. Enemy sailors would often panic and jump overboard rather than face this unquenchable flame. Think about it. In an age of wooden ships, a weapon that could set fleets ablaze and that common firefighting methods only made worse was the stuff of nightmares. It was first used around 672 AD against an Arab fleet besieging Constantinople, and it completely devastated them. For hundreds of years, this fiery mystery protected the empire. The unexpected part wasn't just its power, but its enduring secrecy and the fact that such advanced chemical warfare existed over 1,000 years ago. It was a weapon that defied conventional understanding, a legend whispered in fear by their enemies, and a testament to ancient ingenuity that still baffles historians and scientists. It's like they had a flamethrower in the Middle Ages, but one that shot something far, far scarier. The sheer terror it induced meant battles were sometimes won before they truly began, as enemy fleets might break formation and flee at the mere sight of the Byzantine siphons being prepared. This wasn't just about burning ships. It was about burning morale. Number 11. Camouflage that was actually designed by artists. When you think of military camouflage, you probably picture blotchy patterns of green, brown, and khaki designed to blend into forests or deserts. But what if we told you that the whole idea of making soldiers and equipment invisible got a massive boost from, of all people, modern artists? Yup, the guys painting abstract shapes and weird perspectives. Sounds wild, but it's true. Before World War I, military uniforms were often bright and bold. Think redcoats designed to look impressive and help commanders spot their troops. Blending in wasn't the top priority. Then came the age of long-range rifles and machine guns, and suddenly, being easy to see was a death sentence. The French were among the first to officially create a camouflage unit, the Section de Camouflage, in 1915. And who did they recruit? Painters, sculptors, and theater set designers. These weren't military tacticians. They were artists like Lucien, Victor Guérin de Sévilla, André de Noailles de Segenzac, and even Jacques Villon, who was associated with Cubism. The unexpected genius here was realizing that artists, especially those experimenting with Cubism and other modern art forms, understood how to break up shapes, fool the eye, and manipulate perception. They applied their artistic skills to paint disruptive patterns on cannons, trucks, and observation posts. They created fake trees to hide snipers and vast netting systems to conceal entire bases. The British followed suit, with their camouflage efforts influenced by zoologist John Graham Kerr, who had studied animal camouflage, and artists like Solomon J. Solomon, who advocated for dazzle camouflage on ships, bold, confusing patterns designed not to hide the ship, but to make it difficult to judge its speed and heading. During World War II, this artistic approach continued, with surrealist painters even contributing ideas for deception. It was an amazing fusion, the avant-garde art world, with its radical ideas about form and perception, directly influencing how armies hid from their enemies. So next time you see a camel pattern, remember it might just have its roots in a Parisian art studio, a testament to the unexpected places military advantage can be found. Number 10. Canned food that let armies march across continents. Imagine trying to feed an army of tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands, of soldiers on the move. Before the 19th century, it was a logistical nightmare. Armies relied on foraging, which often meant pillaging the countryside, slow-moving supply wagons filled with perishable food, or herding livestock along with them. Campaigns were often limited by how far soldiers could march before they ran out of food or supplies ran thin, leading to malnutrition and disease. Then came a French confectioner and brewer named Nicolas Appert in the late 1790s, driven by a prize of 12,000 francs offered by Napoleon Bonaparte for a new food preservation method to sustain his vast armies. Appert figured out that if you cooked food, sealed it in airtight glass jars, and then boiled the jars, the food would stay fresh for ages. He didn't know why it worked. Louis Pasteur's work on germs was still decades away. But it did. This was a game changer. What's so unexpected about a can of beans, you ask? Its sheer impact on warfare. Suddenly, armies could carry vast quantities of preserved food with them, allowing them to campaign for longer periods, in more remote areas, and with less reliance on local supplies, which also reduced the friction with local populations. The French Navy began using Appert's preserved foods in 1806. Soon after, in 1810, an Englishman named Peter Durand patented a similar idea using tin cans, which were tougher than glass and even better for military use, though early cans were so thick they often had to be opened with a hammer and chisel. While early canned food was sometimes dodgy, lead solder used to seal the cans could leach into the food, causing lead poisoning. The principle was revolutionary. It meant navies could stay at sea for months without worrying about scurvy, if vitamin C-rich foods were canned, or starvation, and armies could operate far from their home bases, deep into enemy territory. Changed the entire scope and scale of military operations, giving a significant advantage to forces that could master this new logistical tool. A simple can, born out of a wartime challenge, fundamentally altered the ability of nations to wage war, making it an incredibly unexpected but profoundly influential military innovation. Number 9. Barbed wire that accidentally raid-defined battlefields. Sometimes, the most able military innovations aren't weapons at all, but something far more mundane. Case in point, barbed wire. This spiky stuff wasn't invented by some military genius in a top-secret lab. Nope. It was created in the American Midwest in the 1870s by farmers like Joseph Glidden, Michael Kelly, and Jacob Haish, who all developed practical versions. Their goal was to keep cattle from wandering off their land and to protect crops. It was a cheap, effective way to fence off the vast open ranges where timber for traditional fences was scarce. How then did a humble farming tool become one of the most defining and horrifying features of World War I? That's the unexpected twist. Military commanders slowly started to realize its potential for area denial and channeling enemy movements. It saw some use in the Spanish-American War and the Russo-Japanese War. In the Second Boer War, 1899 to 1902, the British used it extensively to restrict the movement of Boer commandos and to help control civilian populations in concentration camps. But it was in World War I that barbed wire truly, and terribly, came into its own. As trench warfare set in on the Western Front, both sides strung up immense, dense entanglements of barbed wire in the no-man's land between the trenches. These weren't just simple fences. They were complex, multi-layered obstacles, often dozens of feet deep, sometimes hidden from view or placed in cunning patterns designed to trap and ensnare. Attacking soldiers, burdened with heavy equipment, would get caught in the wire, becoming easy targets for machine guns and artillery. The wire channeled attacks into killing zones, slowed down advances to a crawl, and made any assault a horrific, bloody ordeal. It wasn't designed to kill directly, but it enabled killing on an industrial scale, contributing significantly to the stalemate and the immense casualties of the war. The simple, innocent invention meant to control cows had in a few short decades transformed into a symbol of slaughter and static warfare. Its effectiveness in bogging down armies was something no one could have fully predicted when those first patents were filed for a better cattle fence. Number 8. Silly putty that bounced out of a wartime lab. This one's a bit of a head-scratcher. You know, silly putty, right? That gooey, stretchy, bouncy stuff that can copy comics and make funny noises. It's a classic kid's toy. But would you believe it owes its existence to a desperate search for a rubber substitute during World War II? It's true. During the war, Japan had cut off the United States' access to natural rubber supplies from Southeast Asia after conquering Malaya and the Dutch East Indies. Rubber was crucial for the war effort. Think tires for jeeps, trucks, and planes, boots for soldiers, gas masks, life rafts, and all sorts of other essential gear. The US government put out an urgent call for scientists and engineers to come up with a synthetic rubber alternative, pooling resources through the War Production Board. Enter James Wright, an engineer at General Electric's lab in New Haven, Connecticut, in 1943. While experimenting with boric acid and silicone oil, hoping to create a viable synthetic rubber, he created a gooey, bouncy, decidedly non-rubber-like substance. It stretched further than rubber. It bounced higher than rubber. It could copy images from newsprint. It broke when struck sharply, and it flowed like a liquid over long periods. But it wasn't a good replacement for rubber in tires or boots. It didn't hold a shape under pressure and wasn't strong enough for most military applications. From a military perspective, it was a dud, a failed experiment, one of many attempts that didn't meet a critical need. So, what's unexpected here? The military link is surprising enough for a toy, but the really wild part is how this failure later became a global phenomenon. For years, the goo sat around, mostly unused, a scientific curiosity sometimes passed around as a novelty. Then in 1949, Ruth Fallgatter, owner of a toy store, encountered it, and with advertising consultant Peter Hodgson, began marketing it. Hodgson eventually took over, borrowed some money, bought the rights, packaged it in colorful plastic eggs, and called it Silly Putty. It became a massive hit in the 1950s, and has been a toy box staple ever since. So, a substance born from the high-stakes pressure of wartime military research, intended to help win a global conflict, ended up bringing joy to millions of kids. Talk about an accidental peace dividend from a laboratory sidetrack. Number 7. Carrier pigeons that were war heroes. Seriously. Okay, sending messages by bird sounds like something out of a fantasy, novel, or ancient history, right? And it is. Ancient people have used homing pigeons for thousands of years, with records showing their use by Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans for communication. truly unexpected part is how incredibly vital these feathered messengers remained even into the 20th century, right alongside telegraphs, telephones, and radios, especially during World War I and even World War II. In an era of exploding technology, these birds were often the most reliable way to get a message through. When communication lines were cut by artillery, radio signals were jammed or intercepted, or human messengers couldn't cross treacherous terrain. Think about it. A small bird, flying high above the chaos of battle, could carry crucial intelligence, requests for reinforcements, or reports from cut-off units, often at speeds of 50 to 60 miles per hour. They were fast, relatively hard to shoot down consistently, and didn't rely on fragile wires or complex equipment that could fail in harsh conditions. During World War I, both sides used hundreds of thousands of pigeons. Mobile pigeon lofts were common near the front lines. Some of these birds became genuine war heroes. Take cher ami, a black check cock carrier pigeon, serving with the U.S. Army Signal Corps in France in 1918. During the Meuse-Argonne offensive, cher ami delivered a message from Major Charles Whittlesey's Lost Battalion, which was surrounded by German forces and mistakenly being shelled by friendly artillery. Cher ami was shot through the breast, blinded in one eye, and had a leg hanging by a tendon, but she still managed to fly 25 miles in about 25 minutes to deliver the message FORHEAVENSSAKESTOPIT, saving the lives of nearly 200 soldiers. She was awarded the French Croix de Guerre, with palm and later taxidermied and displayed at the Smithsonian. Another pigeon, G.I. Joe, an American bird serving with the British in Italy during World War II, saved over 100 Allied soldiers in the village of Calvi-Vecchia in October 1943. British troops had captured the village ahead of schedule, but a planned American air raid was imminent. I. Joe flew 20 miles in 20 minutes, arriving just as the bombers were preparing to take off, delivering the message to cancel the attack. He was awarded the Dickin Medal, often called the Animal's Victoria Cross, for his efforts. The sheer guts and reliability of these birds, in the face of modern warfare, was astonishing. They weren't just cute. They were a surprisingly robust and effective military asset, a low-tech solution that repeatedly proved its worth in a high-tech world. Number 6. The stink bomb designed to make enemies say, "Who me?" Warfare isn't always about bullets and bombs. Sometimes it's about messing with the enemy's head, or in this case, their nose. During World War II, the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the forerunner to the CIA, was known for its creative, sometimes downright bizarre, ideas for espionage, sabotage, and psychological operations. One of their strangest projects was a non-lethal chemical weapon, codenamed Who Me. Its goal: to make enemy officers smell so unbelievably, overwhelmingly bad that they would be humiliated, demoralized, and socially ostracized by their peers and subordinates, thereby diminishing their effectiveness. The idea came from the observation that social cohesion and respect are important, especially in hierarchical military structures like the German and Japanese armies. If you could make a respected officer reek like a combination of rotting garbage, old cheese, and the latrine, it might undermine their authority and make them a laughingstock, reducing their ability to command. The scientists at the OSS tasked with creating this super stink bomb experimented with various volatile sulfur compounds, specifically thiols, aiming for a smell that was intensely foul, persistent, and difficult to wash off. They eventually developed a liquid that reportedly smelled like a potent mixture of feces, rotten eggs, and decaying flesh, a truly vile concoction designed to cling to clothing and skin. Plan was for Allied resistance fighters in occupied territories like members of the French resistance to surreptitiously spray "Who me?" onto German officers using small, concealable pocket atomizers. Imagine a stern, imposing officer suddenly clearing a room not because of his authority, but because he smelled like he hadn't bathed in a month and had rolled in something terrible. The unexpected part here is the sheer dedication to psychological warfare through olefaction. While most military innovations aim for physical destruction or incapacitation, this one aimed for social destruction and extreme embarrassment. Who Me was produced in small quantities, packaged in 2-ounce collapsible tubes. However, it had a major flaw. The compounds were so volatile and pervasive that it was almost impossible for the person spraying it to avoid getting some on themselves, thus becoming a social pariah too. The smell was also so distinctive that it could alert targets that a specific known agent was being used. Because of this and other practical difficulties, Who Me was never widely deployed. But it remains a fascinating, if smelly, example of out-of-the-box military thinking and the lengths to which psychological warriors. Number 5. Exploding rats that were a real and really grim idea. This one sounds like something from a particularly dark cartoon or a spy parody, but it was a genuine plan cooked up by the British Special Operations Executive, SOE, during World War II. The SOE, famously tasked by Winston Churchill to set Europe ablaze, was all about saboteurs, espionage, and unconventional warfare, employing methods that were often as ingenious as they were ruthless. And what's more unconventional than turning dead rats into booby traps? The idea was grimly ingenious and perfectly suited SOE's clandestine nature. The plan involved procuring a large number of dead rats. These rat carcasses would then be carefully hollowed out, and the resulting skin sacks would be stuffed with a small amount of plastic explosive, Nobel 808. A simple fuse would be embedded within the explosive. These explosive-laden rodents would then be distributed by SOE agents or resistance fighters near coal piles that supplied boilers, in factories, power stations, railway engines, or other critical infrastructure in German-occupied Europe. The thinking was that stokers, whose job it was to shovel coal into the furnaces, would likely encounter dead rats in coal supplies fairly regularly. Seeing another one, they would probably not think twice and simply shovel it into the furnace along with the fuel. Once inside the intense heat of the boiler, the plastic explosive would detonate hopefully, causing a catastrophic boiler explosion or at least significant damage and disruption. The beauty of this, from the SOE's perspective, was its subtlety and the potential for widespread disruption with minimal resources and risk to operatives. It wasn't about one massive explosion, but many small, troublesome ones that would collectively hamper the German war machine. What's truly unexpected is the macabre creativity and the detailed planning. The SOE even developed special tools for hollowing out the rats and neatly sewing them back up to look as natural as possible. Now here's the kicker. According to some accounts, the first shipment of these explosive rats from Britain was actually discovered by the Germans. However, this discovery had an unintended psychological effect. The Germans, alarmed by this new and insidious form of sabotage, reportedly launched extensive searches for more explosive rats. This in turn meant that all dead rats, which were common in many industrial areas, became objects of suspicion and fear, causing delays, work stoppages, and paranoia as every carcass had to be carefully inspected. So even though the rats weren't deployed as intended on a large scale, accounts vary on whether any were successfully used this way. The idea of them, once discovered, still caused disruption. It's a testament to the lengths wartime innovators would go to, turning even the most repulsive of creatures into a potential weapon, and inadvertently a tool of psychological warfare. Number 4. Anti-tank dogs that Soviet strapped with bombs. This is one of the most tragic and desperate military innovations you'll ever hear about. A grim testament to the brutality of the Eastern Front in World War II. Faced with the terrifying onslaught of German panzers, which were technologically superior to many Soviet tanks early in the war, the Soviet Union scrambled for any means to counter them. They needed ways to stop these tanks and fast, especially for infantry units lacking sufficient anti-tank weaponry. One of the methods they developed and deployed was the use of anti-tank dogs, sometimes called dog mines or Panzerhunde, tank hounds, by the Germans. Concept was horrifically simple. Dogs were trained to carry explosives, typically 10 to 12 kilograms, in specially designed canvas vests or packs on their backs. They were taught to run underneath enemy tanks. A small wooden lever, about 20 centimeters long, would stick up from the dog's harness. When the dog went under the tank, this lever would strike the underside of the vehicle, triggering a detonator that would set off the explosives. This would, in the process, kill the dog and hopefully disable or destroy the tank by damaging its thinner belly armor or tracks. To train them, the dogs were kept hungry and then taught that food could be found underneath stationary Soviet tanks. Later, they were trained with moving tanks, often with the sound of gunfire and battle to acclimatize them. The unexpected and deeply unsettling part is the deliberate weaponization of a creature known for its loyalty and intelligence, turning man's best friend into a suicide bomber. Soviet propaganda often portrayed these dogs as heroes, and some handlers undoubtedly formed bonds with their animals. However, the reality was grim. There were significant problems with their use on the battlefield. Sometimes, the dogs would get scared by the intense noise and chaos of battle and run back towards their own trenches, occasionally with live explosives still attached, endangering Soviet troops. Another major issue was that the Soviets trained the dogs using their own diesel engine tanks, while German tanks often used gasoline engines. Dogs rely heavily on their sense of smell, and some reportedly became confused on the battlefield, sometimes seeking out familiar-smelling Soviet tanks instead of the German ones, with disastrous consequences. Despite these issues, Soviet sources claimed that anti-tank dogs successfully destroyed several hundred German tanks throughout the war, particularly in the early stages. German accounts often downplayed their effectiveness, but acknowledged their use, and issued orders for soldiers to shoot any dogs seen on the battlefield. Regardless of the exact numbers, it was a desperate measure born out of a desperate situation, proving a chilling willingness to sacrifice these animals in the brutal calculus of war. It remains a stark and disturbing example of how far nations will go when pushed to the brink, and a sad chapter in the history of animal use in warfare. Number 3, Project Pigeon, or when scientists tried to get birds to guide missiles. This sounds like pure science fiction, or maybe a rejected plot for a cartoon where animal sidekicks save the day. But it was a very real American research project during World War II, using pigeons to guide bombs and missiles to their targets. Yes, actual living pigeons. The brain behind this feathered guidance system was none other than the renowned behavioral psychologist B.F. Skinner. Skinner, famous for his work on operant conditioning, think Skinner boxes where animals learn to press levers for food rewards, believed he could train pigeons to recognize a target, like an enemy ship or building, on a small screen and peck at it. The idea, dubbed Project Pigeon, and later Project Orcon for organic control, after it was revived post-war, was to place a pigeon or a team of pigeons inside the nose cone of a missile. Pigeon would be housed in a special harness with a small electronic screen in front of it. This screen would display an image of the target area, projected from a lens or camera on the missile's nose. The pigeon would have been trained using Skinner's conditioning techniques to peck at the image of the target on the screen. These PECs would be registered by electrical contacts or sensors connected to the missile's flight controls, like ailerons and elevators. If the missile started to drift off course, the target image would move off the center of the screen, and the pigeon, diligently pecking at it, would inadvertently send signals that would correct the missile's trajectory, guiding it to its destination with surprising accuracy. What's so wildly unexpected? The sheer audacity of entrusting a complex weapon system to an animal, and the fact that it actually showed promise in laboratory settings. Skinner and his team successfully trained pigeons to peck at various target shapes, ships, buildings, even specific patterns with remarkable accuracy and consistency, even with distractions like loud noises or vibrations meant to simulate battle conditions. They could track targets for minutes at a time. The system even allowed for multiple pigeons, usually 3, each viewing a separate screen, to guide a single missile. Their PECs would be averaged out by the control system to improve accuracy and provide redundancy if one pigeon got confused or stopped pecking. Project received funding from the National Defense Research Committee, and Skinner was passionate about its potential. However, despite demonstrations of its feasibility, military officials were deeply skeptical. The idea of relying on birds for such a critical task in an age of emerging electronic and gyroscopic guidance systems seemed too unconventional, perhaps even a bit silly or unreliable to some military leaders. By 1944, as the war progressed, Project Pigeon was canceled as more conventional guidance systems started to look more promising for immediate application. It was briefly revived in 1948 by the Naval Research Laboratory, but ultimately shelved for good in 1953. Still, it's a mind-boggling example of innovative, if highly unusual, thinking, blending biology and engineering in a way few would have imagined. Number 2. The ghost army that fooled Hitler with inflatable tanks. Imagine an entire army unit whose only weapons were rubber, paint, loudspeakers, and pure, unadulterated trickery. That was the U.S. 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known by its evocative nickname, the Ghost Army, during World War II in Europe. Their mission, to deceive the German army about the strength, location, and intentions of Allied forces, often operating dangerously close to the front lines to make their illusions convincing. This wasn't just a couple of fake tanks hidden in the woods. It was a sophisticated multimedia deception operation on an epic scale, a traveling roadshow of military illusion. What made it so astonishingly unexpected was its sheer creativity, the blend of artistic talent with military strategy, and its surprising effectiveness in misleading seasoned German commanders. Ghost Army, comprising about 1,100 men, many deliberately recruited from art schools, advertising agencies, sound engineering backgrounds, and design firms, used a variety of ingenious techniques that fell into 3 main categories: visual, sonic, and radio deception. For visual deception, they had hundreds of inflatable rubber tanks, cannons, jeeps, trucks, and even airplanes that, when inflated, looked remarkably real from a distance or from aerial reconnaissance. They could set up a whole fake armored division complete with unit insignia painstakingly painted on their rubber vehicles in a matter of hours, and then make it disappear overnight. But it wasn't just about visuals. For sonic deception, they had powerful sound systems mounted on half-tracks, capable of broadcasting meticulously crafted recordings of troops on the move, tank engines revving, bridge construction, and artillery fire, sometimes audible up to 15 miles away. These soundscapes were carefully choreographed to match the visual deceptions. To complete the illusion, they engaged in spoof radio, sending out fake radio traffic with counterfeit call signs and Morse code messages to mimic the communications patterns of real units, hoping to be intercepted by German intelligence. They even had actors impersonate generals and other officers, driving around in staff cars, visiting local towns and cafes, and deliberately spreading misinformation for local collaborators or spies to pick up. Their operations were like elaborate theatrical productions, designed to fool German intelligence and draw enemy forces away from actual Allied troop concentrations or upcoming offensives. For example, before the D-Day landings, broader deception operations, like Operation Fortitude, to which the Ghost Army's techniques were related, helped convince the Germans that the main invasion would come at Pas de Calais, not Normandy. After D-Day, the Ghost Army staged more than 20 battlefield deceptions across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. In one famous operation near the Rhine River, in March 1945, they impersonated two entire divisions, about 30,000 men, to plug a thinly held gap in the American lines, successfully convincing the Germans that the area was heavily defended and drawing artillery fire away from real units. Their existence was a closely guarded secret for decades after the war, only officially declassified in 1996. These artists, designers, and sound engineers saved thousands of Allied lives by confusing the enemy, often putting themselves in considerable danger while armed with little more than their wits and props. It's a stunning example of how imagination and illusion became potent, if highly unconventional, weapons of war. Number 1. Bat bombs that were almost dropped on Japan. This one might just be the most bizarre, almost unbelievable military innovation ever seriously considered and developed to an advanced state. During World War II, the United States developed a plan to attack Japan using bats. Yes, thousands upon thousands of tiny winged mammals, each carrying a small incendiary bomb. The idea, as outlandish as it sounds, actually progressed quite far, receiving presidential approval and significant funding. It was conceived by a dental surgeon from Irwin, Pennsylvania, named Lytle S. Adams, who was also an acquaintance of First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt. Adams was inspired after a visit to Carlsbad Caverns National Park in New Mexico, which is home to millions of Mexican free-tailed bats. He reasoned that bats, being nocturnal, able to fly, capable of carrying small payloads and naturally seeking out dark enclosed spaces to roost during the day, could be weaponized. His plan was to release these bats over Japanese cities at night. They would then disperse and roost in the eaves, attics, and crevices of Japan's predominantly wooden and paper buildings. Each bat would carry a tiny, timed incendiary device. When the timers went off, thousands of small fires would erupt simultaneously across a wide area, overwhelming firefighting capabilities and causing widespread chaos and destruction. What's so utterly unexpected is not just the choice of animal, a creature not typically associated with warfare, but the serious consideration and resources poured into this project by the U.S. military, codenamed Project the 10th Ray. Adams pitched his idea to the White House in January 1942, and unbelievably President Franklin D. Roosevelt, known for his openness to unconventional ideas, approved it, stating, "This man is not a nut." The project was handed over to the U.S. Army Air Forces and later the Navy. Scientists and engineers, including the famed chemist Louis Fieser, who invented military napalm, got to work developing tiny, lightweight incendiary bombs, just 17.5 grams, later 28 grams, filled with a kerosene-based thickened fuel and a timed chemical fuse. They also designed special refrigerated bomb casings, looking like standard bombshells, that could carry over 1,000 hibernating bats each. The bats, mostly Mexican free-tailed bats, captured from caves in the Southwest, would be cooled into a state of hibernation for transport. Dropped from bombers at high altitude, the casings would deploy parachutes and open mid-air, releasing the warming waking bats to find roosts before their tiny incendiaries ignited. Extensive tests were conducted, some with embarrassing results. During one such test at Carlsbad Army Airfield Auxiliary Air Base in New Mexico in May 1943, some armed bats accidentally escaped and roosted under a fuel tank, and in the wooden hangar in the general's car, all of which subsequently burned to the ground. Despite this embarrassing setback, or perhaps because it showed the concept worked a little too well under the wrong circumstances, development continued. Plan was to release these bat bombs from B-29 Superfortress bombers over Japanese industrial cities, particularly Osaka. However, by early 1944, as the project was nearing readiness for combat deployment, some sources say it was slated for mid-1944, it was overtaken by the rapid progress and immense destructive potential of the atomic bomb project. The military leadership, including Admiral Ernest J. King, decided to focus on the A-bomb as a quicker, albeit more devastating way to end the war. The Bat Bomb project was officially cancelled in late 1944 or early 1945, having cost an estimated $2 million, a hefty sum back then. It remains one of history's wildest what-ifs. A truly batty idea that almost took flight and could have changed the face of incendiary warfare.